Canada doesn't run on oil like Saudi Arabia. It doesn't run on manufacturing like Germany once did. And it doesn't run on tech like Silicon Valley. Canada's economy is addicted to one thing, which is real estate. Today, housing and construction make up nearly 1/5 of our GDP, a bigger share than oil in Alberta or cars in Ontario. Over half of the Canadian household wealth is locked up in homes, and banks, they lend more to mortgages than to businesses, factories or innovation. But here's the real question. How did Canada go from handing out free farmland in 1872 to $1 million teardowns in Toronto in 2025? This is the 150-year-old how Canada has built its economy on land and housing and what it means for the future. Right after Confederation, Canada faced a problem, an empty west. To fix it, Ottawa passed the Dominion Lands Act of 1872. The deal? 160 acres of free land for any settler willing to build a house and farm it within 3 years. When the Canadian Pacific Railway was completed in 1885, those free lands suddenly became accessible. Towns popped up overnight at railway stops. Speculation went crazy, and Winnipeg's land values in the early 1880s skyrocketed. Lots were flipped multiple times in the same week. But by 1882 and 83, the boom collapsed. Prices fell by over 90%. Boom, bust, and speculation. Sound familiar, right? Canada's real estate DNA was already being written in late 1880s. The early 1900s brought millions of immigrants, but World War I and then the Great Depression changed everything. Mortgages back then weren't like today. They were short-term, usually 3 to 5 years, with massive down payments. And banks could and did pull the plug at renewal. During the 1930s, thousands of families lost their homes. Foreclosure became so common that Canadians literally held mortgage burning parties to celebrate the rare occasion of paying one off. This crisis forced Ottawa to act then. The Dominion Housing Act of 1935 and the National Housing Act of 1938 were Canada's first national housing building policies. For the first time, housing was no longer just private business. It was a tool for federal economic management. So now let's come down to late 1940s. The World War is over, and after World War II, over a million veterans came back home. With a baby boom underway, Canada faced a desperate housing shortage, which is why a Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation, CMHC as we call it today, was created in 1946. CMHC revolutionized home ownership by offering 25-year insured mortgages with low down payments. And then in 1954, Ottawa changed the Bank Act. For the first time, chartered banks could issue mortgages with CMHC issue guaranteeing them. Overnight, the mortgage credit exploded. Meanwhile, governments poured money into highways, sewers, school, and other infrastructure. Suburbs like Scarborough in Toronto or Burnaby in Vancouver grew from farmland into vast subdivisions of identical bungalows that we see today. This was the birth of Canadian dream. One job, one house, one mortgage, and one car. Home ownership became the badge of middle class success. And now, after 20 years of housing boom, in 1972, Canada government introduced capital gains tax with one big carve out, your principal residence exception. That means if you sold your home and made a profit, it was tax free as long as it was your primary residence. No other investment in Canada got that kind of treatment. And suddenly, housing wasn't a shelter. It was the safest, non-tax, advantaged investment Canadians could ever make. But the ride wasn't smooth. By the early 80s, mortgage rates spiked up to over 18%. It was record high mortgage. Imagine paying almost $2 of interest for every dollar of principal. Many families survived, but barely. The late 80s brought another boom. In Toronto, home prices nearly doubled in 4 years. And when the bubble burst in 1990, the values dropped by up to 40%. It took almost a decade to recover then. Every bust ended higher than the one before. By the 1990s, the real estate was deeply embedded as a primary engine of Canadian household wealth. So now, let's come into 21st century housing machine. In 2000s, the immigration surged. Canadian points-based system welcomed skilled newcomers, and by 2010s, Canada was adding 400,000 people a year, one of the highest per capita rates in the world. Most people settled in Toronto, Vancouver or Montreal, pushing housing demand to record levels. For a brief moment, CMHC even insured 40-year mortgages with zero down. Credit was everywhere. Meanwhile, foreign investment poured in, and in 2017, Toronto had more construction cranes than any US city combined. Canada avoided the 2008 subprime crash that devastated the US. Instead, housing prices kept rising, which only convinced Canadians that real estate always goes up. And by 2010s, the real estate and construction made up nearly 20% of GDP, more than manufacturing, more than oil and gas, of course, more than tech. And Canadians started borrowing against their homes too, using home equity lines of credit, refinancing and even buying second or third or fourth properties using home line of equity. The household debt ballooned. Then came the pandemic. The Bank of Canada cut rates to near zero. Overnight, houses became hot selling commodities. And by 2021, homes were selling $200,000, $250,000 or $300,000 over asking, with 20, 30, 40 offers in bidding wars. Ordinary Canadians became millionaires, at least on paper, just because they owned a home. But the flip side, household debt soared to 170% of disposable income, the highest in G7. Young Canadians were locked out entirely because they struggled to come up with the higher down payment. And governments scrambled with stress tests, but none of it could mask the reality. Canadian economy was more tied to housing ever. Let's put this into perspective. Australia is Canada's twin, housing-driven economy, high immigration and crazy prices. The US, it's more balanced. Americans hold more wealth in stocks and pensions, and housing matters, but it's not everything in US. Now, if we look at Germany, it's the opposite model. With only 50% of Germans own homes, renting is pretty common there with strong tenant protections. Their economy isn't changed to rising property values. In the US, families retire on 401k. In Germany, they retire on pensions. And in Canada, they retire on their house. From free farm in 1872 to million-dollar condos in 2025, real estate has built Canada's middle class, shaped our cities and defined our culture. But it has also left us vulnerable to debt, affordability crisis, and to possibility that one day that the housing ladder can break. But if you build an economy on houses, what happens when the ground shakes? Everything crumbles. So if you guys like this video, like and subscribe this channel. See you in the next video.